Luke Skywalker is one of the most iconic film protagonists ever, the childhood hero of millions, and one of the most beloved Star Wars characters of all time. His story, as told in the original trilogy, is one of the most well-known versions of the hero's adventure, and for many people, Luke Skywalker is what defines their concept of a hero in the first place. But after the events of the original trilogy, Luke's story diverges. For decades, what became of Luke after Return of the Jedi was a story told in the comics and novels of the expanded universe, which today are part of Star Wars Legends. In the past decade, we got another version of Luke's story in the sequel trilogy. These two visions of Luke's later life are quite different, and they both have their detractors and supporters. In this video, we're going to be comparing the two versions of Luke's story and analyzing their themes and messages. As always, we have a quick note on sources before we begin. Both the canon and Legends versions of Luke Skywalker feature in a dizzying variety of EU stories, many of which have different understandings of aspects of Luke's character. For canon, we're solely going to be discussing Luke as shown in the sequels, but that's not really an option for Legends Luke, for obvious reasons. Nonetheless, we're going to be sticking to a relatively narrow band of Legends stories for the sake of consistency and simplicity. These will primarily be Truce at Bakura, the original Thrawn trilogy, the Dark Empire comics, and the Jedi Academy trilogy, with a trace amount of material from Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor, and the new Jedi Order and Fate of the Jedi series. As always, we recommend you read the novels mentioned for yourself, and without further ado, let's begin.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
To understand either version of Luke Skywalker, we need to revisit Luke's arc in the original trilogy. As we mentioned earlier and have discussed in the past, Luke's story is a version of the hero's journey, a mythological archetype that George Lucas took direct inspiration from when writing the original trilogy. It's a simple but compelling framework, and to summarize it, it begins with an ordinary person in the ordinary world receiving a call to adventure. Initially, the call is refused, but fate usually forces the protagonist onto the hero's path anyway, where they receive assistance from a mentor that guides them into the world of the unknown. The hero crosses the threshold of the unknown through a dramatic experience that severs them from the ordinary world, and they then experience trials that help them develop. Another supernatural figure appears to help them on their quest before the hero experiences temptation and a premature encounter with their primary adversary. Typically, this leads the hero into the abyss, their lowest point, and comes with a major revelation. This revelation transforms the hero and helps them complete their quest. Following this, they must return to the ordinary world. They may initially be reluctant to return, but they often are either forced to by supernatural circumstances or rescued by someone from the ordinary world. They usually get some sort of happy ending and are established as a master of both worlds, the known and unknown alike. In the original trilogy, Luke Skywalker hits every single one of these points. He goes from being a farm boy on Tatooine to a rebel hero, receiving guidance and motivation from Obi-Wan Kenobi and surviving the Death Star. After years of fighting in the Galactic Civil War, he receives further training from Yoda before being tempted into a premature confrontation with Darth Vader, who is revealed to be his father. This revelation crushes Luke, but it also gives him the strength to bounce back from his first defeat. He derives strength from his firm belief that his father isn't completely lost to the dark side, finishes learning the Jedi way, and then confronts Vader and the Emperor at Endor. As we discussed in another recent long video, however, the original trilogy puts a novel spin on the familiar formula of the hero's journey. Because while Luke Skywalker becomes a hero and brings down the Empire, he does so in defiance of, not in accordance with, destiny. His destiny, as the films present it, is to slay Darth Vader, and in doing so, to become Darth Vader. But Luke rejects this destiny, convinced that there's still good in his father, and instead of slaying Vader, he redeems him, convincing him through example to return to the light. And so the Emperor is slain, not by Luke Skywalker, but by Anakin Skywalker, at the cost of his life. At the end of it all, Luke doesn't become a new Vader, but helps to destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force, becoming a Jedi like his father before him. Luke Skywalker, as presented in the original trilogy, is in many ways the person we all dream of being. He starts as an ordinary person, somewhat naive and decidedly idealistic, and though he becomes so much more, it's that idealism that defines him as a hero. Luke isn't perfect. He starts out pretty fracking whiny, he's impatient, and he can be headstrong. But his moral compass is strong and unfailing. His ideals are pure, and he maintains them despite the turmoil he experiences. He ends up a powerful Jedi Knight, but this is never what makes him alluring. Much like Superman, what makes Luke Skywalker a compelling character isn't the power and status, but that he has these things without being corrupted. Luke Skywalker is more than a hero. He's fundamentally a noble, compassionate, and righteous person. And he remains that way despite the power he has, despite the adversity he faces. That's not to say Luke never fails or makes the wrong call, but when he does so for the right reasons, and he never becomes disillusioned. His failures in The Empire Strikes Back cost him, and his experiences on Dagobah and Bespin completely reshape his understanding of the world, but his convictions, his sense of moral duty, and his compassion are only strengthened by the experience. He learns from it, and he becomes stronger for the experience. He confronts the sheer power of the Empire, the turmoil of the Galactic Civil War, the evil of the Sith, and the horrors of his own parentage, and yet he doesn't become jaded. He doesn't lose his ideals or his sense of right and wrong. Most people aren't like that. Most of us are more like Anakin Skywalker. But Luke Skywalker represents an ideal to strive for, a source of inspiration, and a reminder that our choices are always ours, that we can always choose to do the right thing, in defiance of the pressures we face. The story of Luke Skywalker doesn't end with the Return of the Jedi, though. By the end of the original trilogy, he's a full-fledged Jedi Knight, now supposedly the last in the galaxy. But as the power of the Empire wanes and a new republic rises, his work has only just begun. To pull an especially iconic quote from Heir to the Empire, "Then I am alone," Luke told himself. "I am the last of the Jedi." He seemed to hear Ben's voice, faint and indistinct, as if from a great distance. "Not the last of the old Jedi, Luke. The first of the new." Ben's voice trailed off into silence, and then was gone. In both Legends and Canon, Luke's next step was to rebuild the Jedi Order, and to do so from the ground up, revising the Jedi way and the fundamental structures of the Order. Anakin Skywalker may have been the chosen one, destined to destroy the Sith and restore balance to the Force, but it fell to Luke to build on that and undo the damage the Sith had done. Luke's character arc wasn't over either. You might have noticed that his arc in the original trilogy only follows the hero's journey up to a point. Luke never really completed the return to the ordinary world, and Return of the Jedi leaves off with him simply having completed his quest. In both Canon and Legends, Luke follows roughly the same initial path. At first, he devotes most of his time to aiding the New Republic in finishing the fight against the Empire, while he searches for Jedi lore and artifacts to learn more about the Order and its teachings. In 11 ABY in Legends and 9 ABY in Canon, Luke deemed his knowledge sufficient to take on the mantle of Jedi Master and start a new Jedi Order. From this point, the paths of the two Lukes diverge considerably. But there's one last important commonality to keep in mind. Both Canon Luke and Legends Luke suffered major setbacks, and at one point, they each turned their back on the way of the Jedi. In Legends, Luke was initially unsure about how to approach rebuilding the Jedi Order. For a while, he refused the call, believing himself too inexperienced to train new Jedi and unwilling to risk creating a new generation of Darksiders. However, as the Force sensitives he turned away began to fall to the dark side without his guidance, Luke began to accept Force sensitives for training, though as his research into Jedi teachings was still incomplete, their training was mostly informal. None of these early apprentices stuck around for long, however, and for the most part, Luke was bogged down in helping the New Republic in its war with the Empire. But he disliked military command, resigning from the role of general after just 6 months, and he remained unsure of himself and what path he should take. One of Luke's biggest challenges in this period came during the Thrawn Crisis, in which he not only had to contend with the forces of Thrawn's Imperial remnant, but also Jarus Sabayoth, the mad, corrupt clone of a long-dead Jedi Master, and Mara Jade, a former Emperor's Hand, a dark Jedi sworn to be a personal assassin of Darth Sidious. Jade's life had been shattered by the death of the Emperor, whose last command to her had been to kill Luke Skywalker, while Sabayoth, who was in league with Thrawn, had fallen to the dark side and sought to convert Luke as well. Luke and Mara Jade ultimately joined forces against Sabayoth during a battle on Wayland, however, where Sabayoth had grown a clone of Luke using genetic material from the hand he had lost on Bespin. Luke struggled to defeat his evil doppelganger, but he prevailed with the help of Mara Jade, who fulfilled the Emperor's last command by slaying the clone. Sabayoth was then destroyed with the Wayland facility, and Luke and Mara Jade parted on good terms after Thrawn's defeat. The experience brought Luke a better understanding of the Jedi way and the dark side, but the biggest challenge was still yet to come. In 10 ABY, the Emperor, who had survived his defeat at Endor through the use of a clone body, returned, and he was able to capture Skywalker shortly before his Dark Empire went to war with the New Republic. Luke was brought to Biss, Palpatine's secret throne world, where he was overwhelmed by the power of the dark side. By this point, Luke was still unsure of how he wanted to proceed as a Jedi. He believed he was the last champion of the light, a burden that he had never truly been comfortable carrying. Seeing the sheer scale of the Emperor's power, Luke was overcome. He had no hope at all in his ability to challenge such power. He knelt before Palpatine, pledging to learn the ways of the Sith. Luke, like a select few misguided Jedi before him, believed that the only way he could defeat the reborn Emperor was to battle the dark side from within. But like past Jedi who had tried such a thing, he struggled to resist the lure of the dark side, sinking ever deeper into the shadows. He was able to sabotage several of the Dark Empire's offenses, but the dark side slowly consumed him. He only escaped the Emperor's thrall with the help of his sister, who had learned of Ulic Qel-Droma, an ancient Jedi Knight who had fallen to the dark side in the same way and had later been redeemed. Leia was able to bring her brother back to the light, and together with the former Jedi, Impatigeos Brand, they eventually managed to defeat the Emperor and his reborn empire. Luke's brush with the dark side and redemption, as well as his experience with Brand, ended up being just what he needed to answer the questions he had been struggling with since Endor. That, and the discovery of a whole bunch of Jedi lore in the Emperor's possession. After the Emperor's demise, Luke anointed himself a Jedi Master, and at long last, he set out to build a new Jedi Order. In 11 ABY, he began by establishing the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4, choosing the temple the Rebel Alliance had once chosen as its headquarters as his new base of operation. As this temple was haunted by the spirit of former Dark Lord of the Sith, Exar Kun, this wasn't the best choice for a Jedi Academy, but after many conflicts and setbacks, Luke succeeded in re-establishing the Jedi Order alongside a dedicated and diverse band of students. Luke's new Jedi Order was modeled on the old order, but it was less disciplined, and among many other changes he made to Jedi doctrine, Luke allowed his students to have romantic relationships. He himself ended up marrying Mara Jade and having a son with her. Luke's struggles with the dark side and the challenges faced by the galaxy never truly ended, not even as the Grand Master of the new Jedi Order. During the Yuuzhan Vong War, Luke struggled to refrain from using the dark side, and in the years after the war, he even briefly turned his back on the Order after the murder of Mara Jade. But he returned to the rank of Grand Master, and Luke Skywalker ultimately died a Jedi, one of the greatest that had ever lived. Through it all, he never lost his compassion, nor did he ever lose his idealism, though he came close on a few occasions. He maintained a firm belief in redemption, even for those that all others considered irredeemable. Luke's character arc in Legends follows a fairly simple trajectory. After Endor, he's completed his original quest, but he's now alone, and he has to choose his own path, all while under incredible pressure. He's a hero of the New Republic and a Jedi Knight, but he doesn't feel comfortable in either role. He knows he has to rebuild the Jedi Order, but doesn't know nearly enough about the Jedi to know where to start. For a while, he focuses on helping the New Republic instead, but as the Galactic Civil War becomes a much more conventional conflict, he finds himself unsuited to being a general. He knows who and what he is, a Jedi, like his father before him, but he has no frame of reference for what that means and how he fits into the new, uncertain post-Imperial world. Steadily, he learns more about the Jedi, and as he does so, he becomes more confident and sure of his place in the universe. His experiences with Mara Jade and Joruus C'baoth strengthen his resolve and give him further experience with identifying and dealing with the dark side. But it's his brief time as Palpatine's apprentice that allows him to understand its true nature. After Palpatine's defeat, Luke feels he's learned enough of the Jedi ways to take up the mantle he was always meant to claim: Master of the new Jedi Order. As a Jedi Master, Luke's core character remained as it always had. He was simply wiser, more experienced, and a bit more measured. His struggles with the dark side never truly went away, but he never again sank fully into the dark side's embrace, and no matter what struggles he's faced, he always managed to find his way back to the Jedi. Luke Skywalker was a Jedi at heart, the valiant knight always trying to save everyone. Even when he failed or was tempted by the dark side, it was always for the right reason, out of a desire to help and save the galaxy. Only when his wife was murdered did he sink into darker motives, and even then, only briefly. Put another way, Luke in Legends remained the aspirational character he's so beloved for being. The challenges he faced were extreme, and his failures were more severe in post-Endor Legends than they were in the original trilogy. His fall to the dark side after the Battle of Endor was certainly an unexpected turn. But sooner or later, Luke always rose to the challenge, and as he had in the original trilogy, he refused to let the horrors he experienced corrupt him. Canon takes a different approach with Luke, though not as different as it may initially seem. Canon expanded universe stories show him going through a similar phase of questioning and exploration before he found the new Jedi Order. Though, unlike in Legends, he doesn't struggle nearly as much with the dark side, and he certainly never outright falls. By and large, Canon Luke initially has his stuff together more than Legends Luke. The Mandalorian shows us that he's settled pretty comfortably into the role of Jedi Master as early as 9 ABY. It also shows us that the canon New Jedi Order deviates very little from the original, retaining the ban on attachments, which is for the best. But then, disaster strikes. As detailed in the sequel trilogy, in 28 BBY, Ben Solo, one of Luke's trainees, is seduced by the dark side of the Force. He leads the Knights of Ren in destroying the new Jedi Order, and Luke, horrified by the monster he blames himself for creating, exiles himself to Ahch-To, the supposed birthplace of the Jedi Order. There, he mostly just stews for 6 years, living as Obi-Wan and Yoda had during the time of the Empire, hiding from the galaxy as it descends once more into turmoil. In the sequels, Luke is found by Rey, who badgers him until he agrees to train her as a Jedi. She learns that Luke had not only become jaded and cynical, but that he's turned his back on the Jedi, going so far as to cut himself off from the Force. Luke distrusts Rey and is evidently uncomfortable with the idea of training another apprentice with such raw strength in the Force, with the memory of Ben Solo's fall still fresh in his mind. Nonetheless, Luke's encounter with Rey is eventually enough to convince him to come out of hiding one last time, at least in spirit. He stalls the First Order just long enough for the Resistance to make their escape in the Battle of Crait, though the effort saps his strength considerably, and he chooses to merge with the Force after the Resistance escapes, finding peace in the light. His spirit goes on to guide Rey through the final stages of her own battle with the dark side. Like in Legends, Luke has an active character arc after Return of the Jedi in canon. It takes him a few years to find his place in the galaxy and actually get the new Jedi Order started, and he continues to face major challenges as a Jedi Master. In canon, however, Luke isn't struggling with the dark side, but something that may well be even more dangerous: apathy.
Insects.
Apathy is death.
Apathy is death. Apathy is death.
Apathy is death.
Statement: apathy is death.
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 Like in Legends, there's a part of Luke's canon story in which he falls from the path of the light and gives up the mantle of Jedi. But unlike in Legends, this isn't a fall to the dark side. Rather, canon Luke turns away from the Force altogether. But what makes this difference especially pronounced is that, unlike in Legends, this fall represents a break in Luke's convictions. His failure with the new Jedi Order has made him jaded, his ideals have been shattered, and his sense of compassion and justice has diminished, replaced with an all-consuming apathy about the fate of the galaxy. This is why so many people responded to Canon Luke with such vitriol. In the sequels, Luke ceases to be the aspirational character presented in the original trilogy. He stands out in the original trilogy precisely because he doesn't get disillusioned in the way he does in the sequels. But that doesn't mean that Canon Luke is entirely out of sync with the Luke of the original trilogy. We mentioned in another long video that Luke's arc in canon completes the hero's journey in ways neither the original trilogy nor Legends does. His seclusion as the master of the new Jedi Order would be his refusal of return, the stage of the hero's journey when the hero, enamored with the world of the unknown, refuses to return to the ordinary world. This leads to some catastrophe, in this case, the fall of the new Jedi Order. Because of this, the hero needs to be rescued by someone from the ordinary world, in this case, Rey, who drags Luke across the return threshold and makes him confront the struggles facing the galaxy, resulting in Luke's appearance on Crait. Typically, this leads to the hero being established as a master of both the known and unknown worlds, and given freedom from the fear of death. Sometimes, the latter part manifests in the form of eternal life, but Luke's story takes the exact opposite approach. Luke instead accepts death, free of fear, and becomes a Force ghost. When you think about it that way, it becomes less surprising to learn that the sequel's approach to Luke's later life was almost exactly how George Lucas intended for Luke to turn out. It's quite common, after all, for idealists to become disillusioned with age. Canon Luke's journey is a familiar one, much like Anakin Skywalker's. In a sense, the backlash against how the sequels dealt with Luke is quite similar to the backlash against how the prequels dealt with Anakin Skywalker. Once more, much of the dislike stems from the uncomfortable familiarity of the flawed hero, which some claim to have ruined the character altogether. It's perhaps because of the overwhelming focus on this side of canon Luke that so many people miss the message of his role in The Last Jedi entirely. The sequels aren't about Luke Skywalker sinking into apathy. They're about him coming back from it and finding redemption. You'll recall from our discussion of Legends Luke that Luke's fall to the dark side in the Dark Empire comics intentionally mirrored the story of Ulic Qel-Droma, a Jedi Knight turned Sith Lord from the time of the old Sith Wars. This is mostly true, but there's one part of Qel-Droma's story that Legends Luke doesn't exactly imitate: his slow road to redemption. For those who are unfamiliar with Ulic's story, Qel-Droma renounced the dark side after slaying his brother in cold blood, but not before his fellow Jedi Knight and former lover, Naomi Sunrider, used an ancient Jedi technique to sever his connection to the Force. Qel-Droma redeemed himself in the eyes of the Jedi by helping them stop Ahch-To, the Dark Lord of the Sith, and after the war was over, he went into self-imposed exile on the ice planet Renvar. There, he more or less just spent his time moping, removed from the affairs of the galaxy and severed from the Force. He sank into apathy, until, about a decade after the defeat of Ahch-To, he received a visitor. In the 10 years after the Great Sith War, Naomi Sunrider had become Grand Master of the Jedi Order, leaving her with little time to train her daughter, Vima, who was also a Jedi. Now an impatient and rebellious teenager, Vima was determined to find and learn from Ulic Qel-Droma. Qel-Droma initially refused to train her, but she kept badgering him, and he eventually came around. Ultimately, training Vima ended up being what Qel-Droma needed to find redemption. Just a few weeks into training Vima, Qel-Droma was fatally shot by a smuggler, but he died having regained his connection to the Force. When he died, he became one with the Force, finally finding peace in the light. Sound familiar? We're not going to say The Last Jedi ripped off Tales of the Jedi Redemption wholesale, but that sure is a hell of a parallel. But perhaps the coincidence is genuine, because this story represents another common storytelling pattern, that of the jaded, disillusioned former idealist being shaken out of the apathy by the next generation. Luke Skywalker never stopped learning the way of the Jedi. Even as a Jedi Master, he learns from his students as much as they learn from him. That's true in both Legends and in canon. In canon, however, what Luke learns from Rey is a particularly important part of his character arc. She allows him to remember who he used to be, and in doing so, she helps restore his ideals. At the end of The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker becomes a hero again, one last time. Rey helps him remember Yoda's most important lesson, the one he had renounced, that all things are possible through the Force, no matter the odds or the strength of the darkness. Luke's last appearance on Crait is a reminder to the audience of what being a Jedi truly means. It's not about the heroics, not about the flashy lightsaber skills or awesome displays of power. It's about the interconnection brought by the Force. It's a simple power, but one far greater than any technological terror or force of darkness. It's a power that doesn't come from within, but from connection, the harmony and interrelation of all life, the very things Luke had forsaken in his 6-year exile. Most importantly, it's a power that isn't restricted to legendary heroes like Luke Skywalker, or even rising Jedi like Rey. The Force is part of all life. It's the power of the Spirit, the power of community and justice, and it persists wherever there exists hope to fuel it. These were all things Luke had to learn in the original trilogy, remembered at last, 30 years later. In exemplifying the meaning of the Force in such a way, Luke sets an example for generations of Jedi to come, even as he passes the torch and prepares to merge with the Force. In canon, as in Legends, Luke Skywalker died a Jedi. At first glance, the two different versions of Luke Skywalker seem like they couldn't be more different. Legends Luke is known as the powerful Grand Master of the new Jedi Order, a hero and idealist to the end. He grows older and wiser, but he remains fundamentally the same person we see in the original trilogy. Canon Luke, meanwhile, is seen as a broken down, crotchety, jaded old man, long bereft of hope and the ideals he once held dear. But when you consider the entirety of both their character arcs, you see that they're much more similar than they might at first appear. Luke Skywalker is not and never has been a perfect hero. He's always struggled. He's always had his failures and his dark moments, and he's certainly been wrong at times. Most of what we see of Luke in the sequels is him at his darkest, but he has dark moments in Legends too. He falls to the dark side in Dark Empire after all, and he briefly turns away from the Jedi and embarks on a quest for revenge after Mara Jade is killed. And in both canon and Legends, he eventually pushes through these moments of crisis, redeeming himself and choosing the light and the way of the Jedi. The real difference between the two Lukes isn't that canon Luke falls off, but that he slides into apathy. He loses the virtues that made him an aspirational hero in the original trilogy. His commitment to doing right and his unshakable ideals so strong they could even redeem Darth Vader. Legends Luke, even at his darkest, never loses those for long. His fall in Dark Empire is actually driven by a desire to save the galaxy and a misguided understanding of what that requires. Legends Luke always remains the ultimate hero, an idealist to the end, and a Jedi at heart, no matter what the universe throws at him. The Last Jedi, to contrast, gives us a Luke who, far worse than having turned away from the Jedi, has become apathetic about the fate of the galaxy. It's somewhat uncomfortable to see, because it's Luke betraying himself, denying everything that we had admired him for. And that is the point. The Last Jedi explicitly frames Luke as having betrayed himself, and allows him to find redemption for this in the end. It shows us a version of Luke Skywalker that has abandoned everything he once stood for so that it can have him repent and become a Jedi and a hero once more. It shows us a Luke Skywalker that's fallen so far so that it can show us that Luke can still come back from it. It reinforces the message Luke's arc had in the original trilogy, that your choices are always yours, and you can always make the right ones, no matter what your supposed destiny is, and no matter how insurmountable evil may seem. That last bit is what Luke Skywalker is meant to teach us in both canon and in Legends. Canon shows us this by having Luke come back from apathy and despair, while Legends shows us the same thing by having Luke never truly succumb to such things. They're different stories, different journeys, but at the end of the day, the message is the same and so is the character. The core of who Luke Skywalker is never changes, not even in The Last Jedi. And the story always ends the same way too, with Luke dying as a Jedi, much like his father before him. So which version of the story is better? There's no objective answer to that question. We prefer Legends in this case, as we do in most cases, but there's nothing wrong with Luke's story from canon, and we totally understand those who prefer it to the Legends version. Personally, as the narrator, I prefer canon. Regardless of which you prefer, Luke Skywalker is Luke Skywalker, the hero we all wish we were. A flawed hero, a stubborn hero, a hero who falls and fails, but a hero to the core nonetheless. That's our comparison of the canon and Legends versions of Luke Skywalker. But what do you think? Are there expanded universe stories about Luke you'd like us to cover in the future? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comment section below.